I don't boy band. Get out of here with that garbage.
You don't boy band?
I do not.
Why don't you boy band?
For reasons.
Okay.
Largely prejudiced reasons.
Should that be the intro? Just cold open with us arguing about why don't you boy band?
Could do.
Okay. Happy Tuesday, everybody. I'm Teller Morose, joined by my co-host YOYO, and this is Tier List Tuesdays, where we have a rainbow on the side of the screen, where we label things. Red is the best, purple is the worst. And today we are doing the fiction book genre tier list. That felt like such a strange intro. I don't know why I went with the colors. S is the best, F is the worst. Otherwise, it's like how you get graded in school plus some Markiplier meme. And
okay. All right.
Yeah, see there?
References.
Yeah, I just dated this episode. Whoops.
Dated it? I mean, It's already like basically a dead meme. I can't say you dated it.
Okay, yeah. It's not...
If anything, it's you turn in an assignment and you put the date like a year ago just to confuse them.
I was going to take the joke a step further and say I took that joke out onto a nice seafood dinner. I dated it. Yeah, so we're doing a fiction book genre tier list, and we want to do nonfiction as well, and we've got movies and TV shows as kind of general ideas, but we need to set those up first. But since we have the fiction book genre tier list ready, we thought we'd go ahead and start with that. And let's stop beating around the bush, man. Let's get straight into let's stop beating around the bush, and let's start the...
Let's start beating into the bush?
I was just gonna keep dragging it out and saying like, oh, we gotta stop, we gotta get to the meat and potato for like 10 minutes.
Okay, good, because I was really just kind of sitting here a little bit lost as to where you were going with that. I felt like you were really beating around the bush there.
Yeah, no, I definitely was. But now we're gonna stop doing that. We're gonna get into the... All right, let's stop this. The first one on our list is historical fiction. And I'll start this off by saying I don't usually like actively search these kind of books out. I think they're interesting for certain things, I guess, but it's not like I don't want to hear a bunch of World War II fiction, like, could be real stories, but definitely written by someone who was not alive during World War II. If it's about something that's very interesting in history, then I think I'd give it a little bit more of a chance, but it kind of depends on the subtext, I guess.
They can be really good. They can be really, really good.
That's true.
It's one of those things that appeals to, history buffs, but at the same time, historical fiction, a lot of times, it's just you're choosing a time in history to set your story, and your story doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the history of the matter.
But it kind of revolves around that to some extent, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you can't just have a story that takes place during, the World Wars and not address that at all. Just be like, yeah that's happening. Don't worry about it.
Here's a book about skateboards.
Yeah.
Oh, and there's like World War II or something, but yeah. I think these are kind of... I think they're like the par. They're like B or C for me.
Yeah, I pretty much
agree. The ones that I've read are great.
They can like... So the issue that you run into is that you have to differentiate yourself from the non-fiction stories. And are you trying to be a fiction story that is just as believable as possible? Or are you just trying to tell a cool story that has that setting? Either way. You have to make a choice.
kind of like where you draw the line on how fiction the book is in general. Because, to an extent, you could have like a book that takes place in a historical event, but also, if you skew too far into the fiction realm, it kind of becomes, something a little more maybe fantasy or, because it's just a matter of how far you bend the reality of the time. Historical fiction typically is like as real as it can possibly be, even though
Right.
the story is not true. But
Which that's always the interesting thing is it's not true.
yeah, it's kind of like, I feel like at that point you should just read about like a famous person in history.
Yeah,
'Cause there are
I
plenty
guess
of-
that's my big hang up on it. It's like you
Yeah.
could just do that.
Right. It's like if I won't go too far into the point I was about to make, but I think there are enough interesting stories out there that are based on real people living real live events that actually happened, to the point where it's like you could just read like an autobiography or a biography of someone who lived in a historical time. And you'd get probably more satisfaction by knowing like, oh, this is actually real,
Yeah, I think that's really the big thing about it is it's something that takes you into a very realistic setting and then asks you to suspend your disbelief and just say, yes, this actually could have happened, and it would be really cool if it did. It's like, yeah, okay, you can.
But at that point, like, if someone's saying, like, suspend your beliefs of what actually happened, I'd probably be like, oh, you're about to tell me, like, a fantasy story or a sci-fi type thing.
But it's
Not
realistic.
quite.
But yeah, I do agree with you. I think I'd say B tier.
Okay.
I've read some really good, just like fiction soldier stories
Mhm.
that written by actual soldiers, people participated in war, and they're just trying to share that experience with you, even though they're not trying to share a real story, and
Yeah.
that can be really cool.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think, like I said, historical fiction is kind of like the par to me, where it's like just about everything is either better or worse. And I think historical fiction is kind of like in it's okay.
Yeah,
That kind of feeling. But let's move on to horror.
yes,
I am a big fan of horror movies. Even though I'm not a big movie fan, I like horror movies. I like horror video games. Horror books are kind of dependent on... it's very, very hit or miss for me, I'll say.
okay,
It's interesting because I think like a visualization thing, like with a movie, is a little bit different because it's like you don't need a ton of care given into the context. It's just like, oh shit, this is happening, and you have seconds to react if you're lucky. Whereas with a horror book, it's a lot more. It's a lot more like built around the context of what's going on around the characters.
yes. There's a lot of emphasis on the suspense.
Yes, which
And
normally I would appreciate a lot more, to be honest. Like especially in video games, but with books, it just there's a different kind of feeling to it. It's not just like, oh, there's a creepy feeling that I'm getting from what I'm looking at. It's like this is being described to me, and I'm going to try my best to put myself in that position. And then something happens,
So the interesting thing for me is that horror stories, books, tend to have a really, my apologies, strong ability to draw me in and make me feel uneasy.
Mhm.
But a lot of times I can't, I don't really enjoy horror movies and whatnot because I end up pulling myself out of the situation because I'm like, no, that's too much. It's too far. I can't.
Right.
But with a book, it's much easier for me to just, if something really scary is happening, I'm caught in it and I'm just thinking like, oh wow, that would be really, really crazy if that were happening to me right now. But thank God it's not, which is great.
And I think that's I don't know how to word what I'm trying to say, but it's like, I think with horror books, it's like, I feel the building up, and it's like, oh, this is getting intense, this is getting suspenseful. And then, you know, when something comes as like a product of that suspense, it's kind of like, oh, like, wow, what's going to happen next? But I'm not afraid, it's just, I'm interested.
Yeah, so
Which
with
isn't
a
bad.
book, you're not expecting the book to like jump scare you like a movie would.
Yeah.
You know, the monster's not going to suddenly shoot through the page and grab you by the throat.
The pages are not going to rip out of the spine and paper cut you.
Right.
Because that's my worst fear.
Oh, okay.
Yep. That scene from Ghostbusters with the floating ghost books. Whew, that got me, man. Yeah, what were you saying?
But because of that, a lot of the time I feel like it's a lot easier to make genuine horror in the written word than it is with a movie. It's so easy to just go for really cheap, just like build up a little suspense and then jump scare.
Yeah.
Or build up a little suspense and then just like some sort of gore scene. But in a book, all you have is the suspense and the not knowing.
Yeah. See, and I think that's where, and this is gonna be a weird tangent, but I think that's where horror movies kind of lost their thrill to me. It's like there's no build up, there's no eerie creepiness to it anymore. It's just kind of like, oh, this person's going down a dark hallway. I wonder if something's going to jump out at them. Oh, look, surprise, or not, something jumped out at them.
Yeah.
Whereas like with a book, it's the exact opposite reaction for me, where it's like I love that building up, that like weird energy that you kind of get from, you know, the environment being described and stuff like that. It's a lot more interesting because it's focused on more minute details, whereas with a movie it's kind of like, oh, like I said, something's attacking this person now.
Yeah.
I think video game one of my favorite scary video games is actually Fear 2, because it has that creepy, like, suspenseful quality to it, and it's more than just like jump scares. It's like kind of demonic, kind of paranormal stuff, but it's not just jump scare after jump scare. It's like it's a build and a jump scare and some like more long lasting horror kind of stuff.
Right.
And I think that's where both movies and books kind of get that feeling wrong. It's like with books and movies, I get one feeling or the other, the suspense or the jump scare, I guess. And I don't know, it's not such a bad thing. It's just not quite what I'd want from a horror book. And I've read like some, I want to say it was Dean Koontz who wrote a horror book that I really like, that like genuinely got me kind of freaked out. I was like not wanting to be alone at the moment, but
yeah,
it's kind of one of those things where in the moment, if it doesn't genuinely like scare me in some way, then I'm just not really feeling it.
I see. I'm really big on the suspense side of things, so
yeah,
I am a pretty big fan.
Okay.
I was thinking about bringing up Firewatch. It's not a horror game at all, but there's a lot of suspense in it.
Yeah, there's a lot of like build up to it.
Yeah, and I will admit that like 3/4 of the way through that game,
mm-hmm.
I was so tense. I had no idea what was happening. I was freaking out.
Yeah.
I was just like, what in the world is going on? And it's not even a horror game. Yeah. And everything, spoilers, everything resolves, and it's fine. There was nothing wrong. You're just like, oh. But, okay.
Yep.
But because of like how much suspense there was, it really stuck with me for a long time. Mm-hmm. I remember the experience quite well.
I'm writing down Firewatch spoiler edit into my notes. But yeah, I think this is going to be kind of complicated because a little further down the list we have thrillers, which I guess we could kind of, we could classify that as like a crime type of thing.
Yeah.
But I see what you're saying because it's hard to separate horror from suspense, especially in a book. You know, it's not like you can just. And then there was a jump scare. I'd be like, oh.
Right.
So I'll say, with that, I mean, I know I said that horror books are very hit or miss, but when they hit, like they're just golden. You know, they're perfect. And when they miss, it's not like the worst thing in the world. It's just like, oh, I don't feel that same sense of fear.
Right.
To the video game.
Of course,
highly
yes.
recommend. But yeah, where were you wanting to put it?
I'll be honest with you. I'm in this really weird spot where I'm actually flipping between A and C, where I'm like, really good, like it a lot, also kind of bad.
Really good, like it a lot.
Yeah.
Well, you could always, go with the average and put them at B.
Could do that.
Are you good with that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Because the more I started to think about it, the more I was like, B is probably the right place in my head. So, if you're good with it,
oh, I'm great with it. Go right ahead. Put it in there.
Sweet. And horror is out of here, and we're moving on to classic literature. Now, this could be anything that is from before, I'll say 1960 to be a little more generic. It can be really any genre, but something that's kind of stood the test of time, something that's written by, someone who is considered one of the legends, one of the greats, one of those things. I am currently in the midst of reading Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland books.
Ah, yes, very good.
And this doesn't reflect on my answer overall, but I don't care for that book. I don't care for Alice in Wonderland, especially the original, which the copy that I have is like this beautiful, like leather-bound book with the cover is like etched into it. It's not like a paper or anything like that. It's etched into the leather itself, which is really cool.
Yeah.
That being said, the book is frustrating to read, and I never thought I'd say that. But it's from a perspective of a 10-year-old girl who's basically going through like a very weird, almost psychedelic experience. Mm-hmm. And it's like the mix of those two things of her being a child and her going through whatever she's going through makes it kind of annoying because it's like, oh, this is weird. And also there's a 10-year-old who is just trying to, rationalize her situation. It's like, okay, but she's 10. And yeah. I don't know. It's too much. I know a lot of people really love the book, and I know a lot of people love like the movies and the overall aesthetic of it all. And there are some really wonderful parts in it, but it has not been the easiest read for me.
So honestly, I think that's a very good point. I like classic literature, and when you're getting into classic literature, you know that you're going to be reading something that's worth reading.
Uh-huh.
But a lot of the time, it's just not. It's not an easy read, and you're going to be putting in a little bit of effort, even if it reads super easy. If you're not thinking about the meaning behind things and so on and such forth, you're not going to be getting the full experience out of it. So you really got to like dig into it. And I would say because of that, I'm not the kind of person that tends to just do that very often. Right. Maybe like one classic literature book a year.
Yeah. I went down a rabbit hole a while back.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Obviously, no one is paying me to say this, but at Barnes & Nobles, they have like these classic edition books, which is where I got the Lewis Carroll book. And I've gotten a couple other ones. I've gotten Dune, which was kind of a surprise, science fiction novel.
Right.
The first one, at least. And the other, I got Dracula. And then the other most notable one to me is Lovecraft's Mythos of Cthulhu, which is in my opinion, the same aesthetic as Alice in Wonderland, but just a lot more cool. And those books are really interesting because, the book that I have, it starts off with like a kind of a here's what you should think about when going into these books, and it talks a lot about. Obviously, it's not written by Lovecraft. That part, at least, that part's written by people who've just kind of dissected all of his work, and they're saying like you got to pay attention to the fact that like the characters are never really described beyond their names because they're not the focus of the book, and the book is more about the descriptions and backgrounds of these creatures that he basically made in his own head.
Right.
And there's just like very interesting little things like that where it's like, hey, pay attention to the fact that, like I said, the characters are basically only there as plot points, and the plot point is kind of the character at the same time. And it's interesting to dive into that kind of stuff. And sometimes, like with that one in particular, it's like, that's really cool, and I like, dissecting literature. And then other times you're just reading it and you're like, okay, but this is frustrating. And there's not to say I want some guidance when I'm reading it, but it's like if it's from a book from the 1800s where English is not the same as it is now in the book, then I'd like for a little bit of, at least I want to know what to look out for. I feel like
any classic literature is classic because it has deeper meanings and is just riddled with all kinds of tropes and just the kind of high language.
Yeah. And it's... Go ahead.
And because of that, you just have to be prepared. You got to know that when you're getting into the book, that's what you're there for. That's what you're going to have to deal with.
I think another big part, too, is like the reason why they're classics is because they told their story in a way that most, if not all people, have never come across. Most people, or nobody, has written a book the same way that Lovecraft wrote the Cthulhu mythos. And no one has written a book quite like Lewis Carroll did at the time.
Yeah.
But now, anywhere from 200 to 50 years later, it's like, okay, it's been done quite a few times, and if you've read books that have been inspired by those books, you're not going to be very enthralled by the plot of, say, Dune, just for the sake of clarity. Like when you read a science fiction book that was written 2 years ago, and it was heavily inspired by Dune, it's just more modernized or more up to date with the language and technology of today, then you look back at Dune and you're like, okay, I've read this before, but now it's written for people before my time, and it's strange to get into that. But
I mean, yeah, there's always a different take on things, and you have to take the time to really like decide if something was different.
Yeah,
what was different about it? Was it better? Was it worse? That kind of stuff can be pretty neat, but I think because of how much of a chore classic literature can be, it's got to go a little bit lower on the list for me.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. It's really cool, and if you're into that sort of thing, it's really interesting, and I do really recommend those classic edition books from Barnes and Noble. Again, they're not obviously paying us. We're not worth their time, but yeah, I'm feeling. I want to say D, because I don't want to go straight into F. That's not.
No. I was actually
my
like,
thing.
I don't even know if D is like too drastic.
Yeah, D would, yeah.
Because
No, you're right,
we're talking
because-
about great books.
Yeah. No, you're right. C seems actually really reasonable the more I think about it, because we have. Part of me almost wants to say B now for some reason. Just as I'm looking, I'm like,
No.
I like classic literature a lot more than I like historical fiction, to be honest. But I can stick with C.
I think C is good.
Yeah.
I think historical fiction still, for me, stays above it just because it's not a chore sometimes, I never go to reading historical fiction and think to myself, well, got to pull out my literature textbook so I can understand why that blimp exploded that time.
That's fair. Okay. Next up, we have short stories. This is an interesting one to me because I think outside of being in public school, I don't think I ever read another short story.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, I've come across a couple, and I've come across some people that have written them, and I'm sure that their work is wonderful, but I never actively looked into finding short stories. It was really only there out of necessity. But what's your take?
So, okay, short stories. I like short stories a lot. I can't say that I regularly read them, but I have in the past. Read quite a few short stories of various genres.
Mm-hmm.
The really cool thing about a short story is that you can sit down and just take like an hour or whatever and just read it. And the whole thing will start, build up, climax, fall back down, and end.
So basically,
in that time slot.
I hate to mince words with you here, but basically you just said you like short stories because they're short, and
pretty much,
and
yeah.
I'm
actually,
a douche, and I'm sorry for calling you out on that.
But
I see your point.
okay. I don't know that that's like a genuine statement because I also love really, really, really long series.
Yeah,
I've read the Wheel of Time multiple times through. I just started back on the. Oh no, not the Silmarillion. I've read that one too. Yeah, they're just really, really long series. Okay.
Yeah. I'm right there with you.
But the cool thing about a short story is that you don't you get a full experience in one go.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Where it's like you kind of have that entire feeling of like, wow, like I just read this entire thing and I still have time in the day, and it's not like you're chipping away at it one chapter at a time or whatever. It's kind of just like, okay, it's here, and oh, there's this cool part, and wow, that's great, and it's over, and I feel good, or I feel scared, depending.
A really nice way to get back into reading if you're getting out of it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't think about that. The book that got me back into reading this year, and we'll probably talk about this at some point later on, but the book that got me into it, back into reading, was pretty short, but it was also, I wouldn't consider it a short story.
Yeah.
But that's a good point. Like if you're, kind of out of the loop when it comes to reading and you want to get back into it and stuff, short stories is probably a great way to go because you get that first feeling of like, wow, I read this story and it was nice and it was, not like, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not like raining down on you where you feel like, oh, I have to read this,
Yeah, and you get that accomplishment,
That's, yeah.
I got it done.
Lord knows I need that.
Because that's one thing, I actually have this weird mixture of when I finish a book, I tend to get like post-book depression, or when I finish a whole series,
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I like really, really long series, because then I don't have to worry about it until, a year down the line or however long it takes me.
Yeah. Have you heard of this book series called Naruto? It's
oh no.
It's like 75 issues, I'm just saying it's a long series. But to your credit though, I do like your point about short stories being, you get that feeling of accomplishment in very little amount of effort. And I think a lot of people, like myself included, kind of overlook short stories because it's, like I said, it's a public school kind of thing where it's like you read those so that you can very quickly learn how to decipher literature and stuff like that. But
right.
I think beyond that, I think there's probably a lot of really good short stories out there that, people don't get a lot of credit for writing just because it's, a short story.
Yeah.
Which, I myself am kind of fallen into that feeling of, I think short stories are mostly for kids, so I don't read them. But yeah, that's you bring up a very excellent point that I'd never would have thought of.
Well,
With that
thank
being
you.
said, F tier. No, I'm kidding. I'll take your lead on this one, to be honest, because like I said, I haven't read very many short stories outside of school.
I have a pretty positive opinion of them. I would honestly put them in A tier.
Okay.
It's just infinite possibilities and very little downsides. Like, I don't get any sort of post-book depression from a short story. Occasionally, if it was really good, I might just, like, it leaves me wanting more, but that's part of the beauty of a short story is it gets your creativity flowing, gets your imagination going. You're thrown into this world, you're there for a little bit, and you're like, wow, that was really cool. Or maybe you hate it, but then it's over and it's fine, so no one cares.
Yeah. Okay, fair point. Yeah, I'm all for that. Short stories. Plus, that kind of mitigates the point of genres, I guess, because short stories can be anything. But I have read short stories, that were like, horror and more than just, like here's a family-friendly life lesson you can get. It's like there are definitely short stories of every variety, including this next one, thrillers. Wow.
Yep. So thrillers are like horror again, but with more suspense and less horror. Usually dabbles into mystery a bit, crime solving. A lot of fun. They're big character pieces a lot of the time, which I really enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Should I include mystery books as a form of thriller? I feel like that's weird, but
yeah, no, I mean,
or we could just add mystery as a separate book. But I feel like the crime kind of detective work kind of books, I feel like those should definitely fall into thrillers to some extent.
For the most part, I would say they almost always do.
Okay, so allow me to introduce a very special author. My girlfriend and I are very fond of this author, despite having only read the titles of her books.
Okay, hold on now.
No. Hear me out. Her books. Her name is Joanne Fluke, and she writes a mystery series surrounding. I'm reading this just off of Wikipedia very quickly. She's best known for her cozy mystery series surrounding a small town baker. And the titles of these books are just Chocolate Chip Cookie Murder, Carrot Cake Murder, Chocolate Chip Cream Pie Murder. And it's a mystery book. It's a crime thriller type thing. But then there's also recipes.
Oh.
And I hate to say it, but Joanne Fluke is a fucking genius. It's so interesting because, and I gotta also point out, there's like 30 of these books. It's like a long-running thing. I don't think she gets the recognition she deserves. So rather than saying subscribe to some other YouTube channel or subscribe to us, by the way, follow us on social media, instead of saying that, I'm going to say go buy some books by Joanne Fluke and then learn how to cook and then also be thrilled.
Okay.
Was that too weird of a tangent?
Okay, but you haven't actually read any of the books, though, right?
No, but every time I go into the bookstore, I just go to the section where her books are, and I just read the titles as dramatically as possible. And someday I will buy one of those fucking books, but at the moment, I don't know why I haven't, to be honest.
I think you have to read the book first before you recommend it to other people. I'm pretty sure that's correct.
Just go ahead and read it, and then you guys can. Oh, now I just want to do a Joanne Fluke tier list.
Oh no.
But yeah, I have to read like 10 of the books first, which seems fine because they all seem very interesting. That being said, I won't let that sway my opinion. I just thought it was a fun little tangent to go off of. Just cookbook crime thrillers.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of the separation between horror and thriller for me is very hard to actually discern, because they both, to me, like all horror books are kind of thrillers to some extent, unless, like we said, we're including like the mystery and crime books.
Yeah, no, so the big thing that usually separates horror and thrillers is that horror has a focus on the bad guy. Whereas thrillers, it's not really about the bad guy. I mean, yeah, you're trying to solve a mystery or figure out what's going on.
Or a
But-
cupcake murder.
True.
Sorry, go ahead.
But it's normally a character piece. It's normally about the heroes.
Yeah.
How are
the
they
detective,
handling
the
it?
cop, yeah. Okay. That's a fair point. That being said, I think I would kind of put them side by side to some extent. Like they both have that same, for the most part, kind of like an eeriness, or like what's gonna happen next, that kind of suspense, be it for one reason or another. Like the feeling is still the same for me. I guess horror just kind of has that aspect of you know, the murderer or the monster is still out there kind of thing. Whereas
Yeah.
a thriller usually ends with some kind of, resolution that's a lot more than just, somebody fucking died. I'm trying to find the right way to word it, but I do think they do kind of go side by side.
Maybe.
What's your take? I'm curious.
I really like the tendency of thrillers to explore characters and thought processes and character development and interactions between characters. For me, it makes that a very real and approachable genre.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with horror, a lot of the time, it's something like very clearly not real, and that's what lets me enjoy it, because if it were real, I'd actually be freaking out and, having a heart attack.
Okay.
But with a thriller, it's much easier for me to just get into it, and I really can get to feel like I know the characters, and
Yeah.
I empathize with them. I think to myself, I feel what the detective is going through. I felt that kind of, uncertainty, and could it really have been his best friend this entire time?
Right.
I get that.
I think you were probably saying this just in a slightly different way, but I do like that the thrillers are more about the process of the resolution, whereas the horror books are more about the crime itself, I guess. And again, I still feel like they're pretty hand in hand, but I would put it at B.
I'd say I prefer thrillers over horror, so for me it's more of an A, but
Do we have a potential tiebreaker this round?
not really, no.
I could I could flip a guitar pick.
I mean,
I think I have a coin. If you want to put them at A, if you genuinely feel like A is the right place for them, I will submit. But
well,
got 'em out.
submit then, because
All right.
it's going in A.
All right. Even though I'm the one controlling the motherfucking tier list, but that's fine by me, man.
Uh-huh.
Did I spell that right? That looks right.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Sitting a little bit far back, so gotta
Oh
squint.
yeah. I am a good 2.5 inches away from my screen, and somehow I still can't tell. Anyway, let's move on to next on the list. We have graphic novels, and I want to preface this by saying the book that did get me back into reading this year was actually a graphic novel. It was the first issue of Bone, subtitled Out from Boneville. It is a book that I've read a long time ago when I was in probably middle school, but it's just such a timeless thing, and the artwork is really great, and I just absolutely loved it, and I felt so much nostalgia when I saw it in a bookstore that I had to go out and buy it. And I really, really love graphic novels. Not quite like in the manga style so much, but if you can find like Bone, I think is a perfect example. If you want to get back into reading, it's cute. It's got kind of more mature themes about like like there's themes of like death and stuff like that in the book, which I think they take it in a very not lighthearted, but kind of a family friendly way. But it's also a very it's just such an interesting read. It's such interesting characters, such unique artwork, and there's a simplicity to it that I really love. But it's also a very heartfelt thing that I really enjoy.
Okay. I am not overly familiar with graphic novels. I cannot say that I've read many, and at this exact moment, I don't recall even ever reading any.
Really?
I've read comic books and I've read manga, but
Okay.
never a longer dedicated, novel.
Interesting.
And so
Okay,
I think I'm mostly going to be taking your lead on this. I will say I like. I do think that having art can bring a lot into a written story.
Yes, 100%. And I think that's why, as you kind of progress through the ideas of the amount of art that's put into something. I think film and video games are very unique in that aspect because it's like there is music and sound design, and there's the actual visual art of it, and there's the writing, and there's with video games the interactability of it all.
Mhm.
And that being said, graphic novels to me, like, I do really care about the writing, of course, but I think having very specific artwork or very unique style in that aspect is kind of what brings it up for me. Like if you look at the characters in Bone, the main characters, they're literal just like white blobs,
Right.
and as the story progresses, they find like actual people that are kind of drawn more like conventional comic characters, but then they're involved in this world, and it's really there's such an interesting part to it that I really love. Excuse me. But yeah, if you are interested in graphic novels, I would say Bone is a really good one, and also Sentinel. I don't know if they still make that series anymore, but if you can find it, it's very interesting. Kind of junkyard Gundam kind of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. We can include manga in this if you want to, since I don't think we have that on the list on its own.
Well, I mean,
It's kind of it's in the same position. If we're thinking about longer stories that are written but also have an art form to them, like a visual art form.
I suppose I've never been really big into manga or comic books. Like I've read some just as an obligation because you can't be a weeb otherwise, you know.
You can't pass the weeaboo test until you read. I'm getting fucking emails left and right. I don't know if you can hear it. If you can,
I
then
actually
I
can
apologize.
hear that. Yeah, unfortunately.
It's real fucking loud for me. Maybe after we finish this one, we'll take a break and I'll shut that off. But anyway, yeah, we can include manga as part of it, and I agree with your statement. Or I'm in kind of the same boat where it's like I read a couple. There were a few that were really interesting to me, and there were quite a few that were just kind of like not worth the $6 I spent on it or whatever.
Mm-hmm. So for me, at least with manga, a lot of the time the story ends up falling behind a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Like the artwork, it adds a lot, but the story itself ends up kind of suffering. Whereas I feel like that shouldn't be the case.
Right. And it's weird with manga, and I know that they do this for a specific reason, but it feels like there are almost like filler books, and I hate that so much about any like really any comic, but manga especially, because usually they adapt it into a TV show and they want to have as many episodes as possible. But when you have a book that feels like filler, it ruins the whole thing for me. It's like, let's move the story along and let's kind of get things rolling again. And it's weird to be kind of taken aback by just the fact that there's some side story that they want to tell, which is fine, but I feel like it's weird,
If it were in a novel or something, your side story would be a small standalone short story that's published separately, or it would be a like one chapter, like either at the end of the book, maybe in the middle, but that's a little weird.
Yeah.
And you just dedicate to this thing, and it has a point. It serves a purpose. It's trying to tell you something that you wouldn't get unless you saw it from this other person's perspective.
Or it's just a situation that they wanted to write about, which is, like I said, it's fine if you want to write about it, but it seems just, I don't know, it's weird to just kind of drop out of the story of whatever the main focus of the series is, and then just kind of fall into something else. And there's probably better ways that some of them probably do something a little bit different, but I've come across that in a handful of what I'll say popular manga. I don't like it. That being said, I really do like graphic novels. Mostly as an idea, I like graphic novels, but also I do just the ones that I've read. I've been very, very fond of. Not quite as much with manga, but
okay.
I don't know where I stand on this. This tier list is getting kind of weird for me, because I didn't think that thrillers would be above horror. I didn't think that historical fiction would be at B. But we'll sort it out if we need to.
Yeah.
Where would you place graphic novels? I want them for me. It's B, maybe A.
I said I'd follow your lead on it, so I'm willing to accept that. But
well, where would you stand if you had a leg to stand on?
If I had a leg to stand on, I'd probably put them in C.
Okay. I'm feeling B. I'm gonna be honest. B for bone.
Sure.
Okay. Everyone's on edge. I'm just kidding. We all hate each other. No, I'm joking.
There is an interesting thing that's going to go straight into the comic book part of this, and like I said, I've never really read graphic novels per se, and so comic books, there's one thing I like about them.
Oh, just one?
Just one.
Okay, hit me.
It's almost the same thing as with short stories, in that you get what you came for.
Yeah, you get that full emotional cycle in a few pages. I both agree and disagree with that, because as someone who's read quite a few like DC comics, they continue into each other quite a bit.
Yeah.
And usually that gives me more of a feeling of, oh crap, I have to see what happens next at the end of every comic.
Well, yeah, that's kind of the point.
I know, but I don't feel that same resolution.
I mean, it never fully resolves, but usually they resolve an arc, resolve a conflict.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And depending on the comic that you go for, there's usually like a really, really interesting art style to them. Not quite as unique as some graphic novels that I've gotten into, but like the Nightwing New 52 comics were always really, really interesting when it came to their artwork.
Well, see, that's okay. This is where I'm kind of like running into an issue here because I love unique art styles,
Mhm.
and I will say, manga, graphic novels, comic books have some of the most interesting and unique art styles I've ever seen.
Right.
Really, really enjoy it.
Mhm.
But I'm not grading them on their art.
You're grading them on their writing.
Yes, I'm grading
Okay.
them on. If I were gonna sit down by the fireplace with a pipe and a robe
In
and
a comic book.
and a comic book and
Okay.
just really delve in, just really enjoy myself here. What am I getting the most enjoyment out of when it comes to a book? And for me, like, the art is nice, but at the same time, as a book, I'm just like, yeah, okay, I guess. It's fine.
Okay. I'm really just I'm lost in the image of like you just chilling at a fire in like a fancy like mansion state in a robe with a nice
You,
cigar and a fucking comic book.
you go up to the gigantic bookcases with
Yeah.
all the beautifully leather bound, golden
Yep.
engraved,
You've got like
spined
the Art
books.
of War and all these like, philosophy books and all this stuff.
You
And then you
reach
just
in
whip out
between two of those beautiful, elegant books and pull out just
the
a
Sonic the Hedgehog issue number 12.
yes.
I gotta find a picture of that comic cover. I don't remember if it's 12 or not, the one I'm thinking of, but it's good shit. But yeah, man, that was a weird tangent. What the fuck? What were we talking about?
That wasn't even a tangent. That was the most on task we've ever been.
You're right.
Comic books.
Yeah.
They're fine. They're bad. They're fine. What do you think?
I'm thinking C.
C?
C for comic book.
C for comic book?
C for classic literature.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. Not just because of that, but because it's like they are for one, they're definitely an acquired taste, kind of in the same vein as like classic literature, where it's like if you're not a fan, you're probably not like you have to be really, really invested in the story and the character and the even just the world that they're put in. And I think it's really hard nowadays to go and find like let's say like a Batman comic where it's like it starts with his beginning. Like that's very rare of a thing to find unless it's kind of like off kilter. And then there's, presumably tens of millions of comic books out there that you kind of have to sift through in order to find the continuing issue of the story that you're reading.
Yeah, I mean, they're cool, and I just feel like it's, like you said, an acquired taste. It's a cult following kind of thing. Like, the people that like them, love them, and everyone else, probably not your best bet for a book to read.
Yeah. And I think people are like, obviously nowadays people are fans of Marvel comic characters, but I don't think that's because comic books are cool. I think it's because people spend billions of dollars on a movie franchise.
Yes.
And that makes it a little more, interesting. But I think with the medium of comic books itself, like if they didn't have the cinematic universe, I don't think Marvel would be in a very great position at the moment.
I highly doubt it.
Yeah. So with that being said, comics, cool. C for cool. And that'll be the last time I use alliteration.
Doubtful.
Yeah, you're right. Because next up we got science fiction. C is in science.
C is in science.
We also have an S, but that's too obvious. Science fiction books are arguably one of my favorites, to be honest. I really love just about every science fiction book that I've gotten into.
Interesting.
And this is a weird, not that we haven't had any of these today, but a weird tangent is a lot of the first science fiction books that I read were actually the books that are based on the series Halo for the Xbox.
Right.
Because I was a child when that first game came out, and I just absolutely loved it. It was cool. It was kind of scary at certain times. It was dramatic, and reading the books that kind of gave a little bit more backstory was just a glorious thing to me. And a lot of those books are surprising. Like, they're New York Times bestsellers. They're very, you know, written by reputable authors. Excuse me. And this is not just like me being a fucking Halo fanboy, but it's like they really do, like, they serve their purpose as a book, not just like, like, oh, you like Halo, here's a thing that's related to Halo. Like, they're good books.
Yeah. I like science fiction a good bit. It's probably my second favorite genre.
I know what your first is, but I'm glad you say that science fiction is your second.
The only thing that tends to hold me back in science fiction books is that there's this weird line that you have to draw where you say, how much effort do I want to put into explaining the science of the science fiction?
Jurassic Park.
Yeah, exactly. you end up in these kind of situations sometimes where they're like, oh, and then you just hop into the teleporter, and they're like, yeah, okay, the teleporter converts into light particles, and you're like, okay, cool. And then they're like, oh, yeah, also, by the way, this button will instantly change your mood to make you happy. It's like, how does it do that? And they're like, it works.
So it's just like a vitamin D pill? I don't...
it's just kind of... There's always that, like, slight mystery where, like, with science fiction, like, you don't have to, but in some ways you're almost expected to give an explanation for things. Whereas in a fantasy world of some kinds, there's, like, different levels of how much explanation you want to give for something.
Yeah. And I have a feeling that science fiction and fantasy are going to be our S tiers. But I think that's sort of a wonderful thing about science fiction books is that you can be interested more in the fiction than the science and still have like a really interesting story that's just about like fucking people with laser guns or whatever. Not having sex with people with laser guns, but you know what I mean. Just fucking people.
I mean, do what you want to do, man. It's okay.
Thank you. But also, if you're one of those people that like wants to know like the science behind or the theoretical science behind what's happening in the book, there are science fiction books for... God damn it, that sound. There are science fiction books for people who are more invested in the science or the theories of it than the actual fiction. And then there's, obviously people out there that are going to be fans of that a lot more, and the option is there, which I can appreciate.
Right.
Personally, I love science, but I'm not good at it. So when people kind of throw theories at me when it comes to like that kind of thing, especially anything to do with space, it's like I'm very interested, but I can't really grasp this. So personally, the like 80% science, 20% fiction is definitely not my speed. But that's because I'm, as I quoted in the last video I uploaded, I'm a big dummy dum-dum, and I'm 7. So anyway, I would go so far as to put science fiction at S. I really do feel like it's kind of there for entertainment, be it baseless or based in theoretical science, and I think that's pretty fucking cool.
So I'm going to take it just a step further, and I'm going to say yes, absolutely S. And the big reason for me is that there's no better way to present human struggles or the sort of like challenges that we're dealing with, or really like exacerbate an issue that we are experiencing to make people understand, than to just say, what if the future was like this?
I'm so glad you said that, because that is how a lot of like there are surprisingly like societal and political elements to a lot of science fiction books that, for the most part, probably go pretty overlooked. But at the same time, it's a good kind of hypothetical as to what life could be like in the future if things go a certain way. And even if you're not, the most, if you're not super enthusiastic about science, you can still kind of look at it and be like, okay, this is what might. I'm struggling so much with my words. This is what technology might cause for the future, or this is what politics might cause for the future, based on, like hypothetically, if A and B happened, what would be the outcome of it?
Right. And a lot of times it's just kind of a good way to explore situations that we're dealing with here, where a lot of stuff you can just pass it off. Like, and this is okay, science fiction, maybe not, but there's plenty of science fiction stories that explore worlds like the Lorax, where environmental damage has gone out of control, and how did we have to deal with that? Look at the Matrix and the exploration of AI and whatnot.
The Matrix is actually a really solid example of that. Even though I know a lot of people just, people who take that seriously in any aspect are usually considered like the conspiracy theorist or the crack nuts or whatever you want to call them. Is crack nut a term?
Sure.
Yeah. I'm a crack nut, so I love The Matrix. But it is like at the end of the day, it is still a movie that's very enveloped in a certain concept that is kind of a thing that we're approaching, which I don't know. It's just such an interesting thing to look at. People from I want to say the late 80s was when they probably started writing that script out into the early 90s to say like, hey, here's where we're going to be heading in the future, and now we're getting kind of closer to that point. Not quite with like, the robots growing us like we're batteries necessarily, but we do have like VR. You're right. But we do have like VR experiences and stuff like that, where it's getting to the point where we can put on a set of goggles, if that's the way you want to put it bluntly, and you can see a character form of yourself moving each individual finger and getting into like, sword fights and shit like that.
Which is just amazing.
It is. It's absolutely incredible. But
I cannot wait until every single time that I don't dodge roll correctly in a Dark Souls game, I get to feel my legs being chopped off. I can't wait. I'm ready.
That's going to be the best. This is going to be the dumbest thing you'll ever hear today. But that's eventually going to be the best form of exercise, is just like, hey, put on some VR goggles and then fight a dragon in this big open, like, VR room, I guess. And then it's going to be like you and 5 other people that are just going to get their daily exercise, and you're putting on a pair of goggles and gloves, and you're sword fighting with a bunch of like ogres or something.
I unironically believe that would almost completely solve the obesity problem in the United States.
Yeah. Because you think about it, because like a lot of people, not to say obese people, and I'm not going to stereotype anybody, but like if you were told that your form of exercise would be a video game, a multiplayer quote unquote video game where you like fight an army of some sort, people would lose their minds over that. They'd be like, this is a great idea.
Yes.
Like, please. I would go out and spend like, imagine if that was in like every gym in the United States, or most gyms, I'll say.
Sure.
And you're paying like however much a month to go and play in a giant VR room with a bunch of strangers, and you're like, oh, like let's, fight the swamp monster or whatever. Like every time you go in there, they have like some other kind of different experience that's just in VR. People would be willing to exercise for that,
Yeah, I'm 6 different kinds of sold on that idea. Like, don't even play.
Gold's Gym, get on it, because I really want to go to the gym, but I'm sad and lazy. So if you had a VR room,
if you had a VR room, I could convince myself to go over there and couch potato in your VR room. Don't worry about it.
Science fiction gets an S. Sorry for the delay there.
S for science.
And fantasy. I don't want to put it at F, but I do want you to notice that as alliterative as we've been, your presumably favorite genre of fiction book starts with an F.
Yes. Well,
And I'm totally fine with just putting this straight onto S. I have no issue with that, but I do want to ask, what is it about fantasy books that you just absolutely love?
the beautiful thing, the thing that has always, always, always drawn me into it, that even like this same reasoning was part of why I chose my college major, which is unrelated to fantasy story at all.
Huh.
It's the infinite possibilities. In a fantasy world, you can just set anything as it is, and nobody has any reason to not believe you because it's fantasy, and that's just how it works.
Okay.
And I love that. I love the freedom. I love the not knowing what the author is going to think of. What is their fantasy world going to have in store for me, you know? A lot of sci-fi, I mean, some of it super unique, fantastic. But a lot of the times it can get a little bit, you know, derivative. And of course, you know, fantasy can as well. You know, if every story's about knights and dragons, okay. That can get a little worn out.
Mm-hmm.
But there's just so many. Fantasy is founded on the idea of creativity. That's the whole point.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I really, really enjoy it. I really enjoy seeing what the minds of other people have been able to create.
Yo. Wow. That was a absolutely beautiful way of saying it. It is like anyone who is an author, regardless of what genre you write in, obviously they're very creative people and they do kind of build a story. But when it comes to fantasy and to in a lot of cases science fiction, is like you're building an entire world. You're building a species, or you're building a whole world. You're building kingdoms, and you're building alliances between kingdoms, and you're building lore that has some sort of importance to your story.
If there's any sort of magic, you have to build a whole like you have to decide how set in stone are the rules of your magic system. Is it a soft magic system where like anything can happen? You just have to believe that it'll work. Or is it like hard rules where like you have to say a specific thing and make a hand motion and offer up the blood of a virgin goat, like
or are you an elf? Check yes or no,
Right, like
and there's so much to it that like for some cases it's been kind of like we'll say not that it's a book necessarily, but like the Dungeons and Dragons lore is kind of like a lot of people follow that lore of like, these races have, certain powers that other races don't and things like that. And there's just a certain amount of like, I guess colloquialism is probably the right word, or a certain culture around, these are the ideas that, these are the types of characters you want to have in your fantasy novel. But the people that stray away from that, and even the people that stick to it, always have like such a unique and interesting standpoint on it. And it's not just like, oh, here's this problem that this person has. It's like, here's an entire, basically continent that we get to tell you about. And here's why we want to have like 7 books so that we can explain why these minute details are like very important to the maybe political system of the world that we've built. And there's just such a, I think that to me it takes a lot more like just you have to be so much more dedicated to write those kind of books, to come up with your own personal world that you've created, or your personal explanations for science. And I don't know, there's just something so like respectful about that. Like if I see a science fiction book or a fantasy book that has like a really in-depth analysis of their own world that they've created, it's like not only did you make all of this up, but you made it like interesting enough for me to be, you know, able to take that experience into my own real world problems.
Yeah. Honestly, for me, like one of the best things about reading a fantasy story is getting to see the world as the author slowly, you know, reveals things in the story. And sometimes the story is not even why I'm reading the book. Like, of course, I'm enjoying whatever the story is, or I wouldn't be reading it. But sometimes it's just to see what the world has in store. It's like I'm using the book to explore an entire new reality.
Right.
And that's awesome. That's brilliant.
It is, yeah. Okay, I think we sucked fantasy's dick enough.
Yeah, let's slap that an S for
Is there
for suck? I guess. I don't. I mean.
S for what's a fantasy race or class that uses the letter S? S as in fucking,
yeah. Come on, hit me with it. Let's
this
go.
is just turning into me trying to think ASMR, and I can't think of any races in the fantasy world that start with an S.
Really?
I can't think of one. Is there one that I'm blatantly missing?
I'm sorry. I'm just.
No. Continue to laugh at my ASMR.
Yeah, I think I will actually. I think I'll keep that up for quite a while.
I can't think of one, but I'm deleting fantasy.
Okay.
And those are I knew from the very start like those were going to be the top ones for us.
Yeah.
But we've got two more. This one, romance, is we are probably not the demographic of most, if not all, romance novels. That being said, I've read one or two, not completely, but I've dove into a couple.
Me too.
The problem I have with romance novels is that they always seem so unrealistic, even though they're supposed to be like this, telling of a romantic tale. A lot of the time, it's just like I don't think this would ever happen in real life, or maybe I'm just talking to the wrong people. I don't know, but
it always feels like a romance story. Like it's. It feels like a story. It doesn't feel like something that you believed actually happened to someone. It feels like a manufacture of, yeah, this could totally happen. This is definitely your one true love. Definitely could totally come into a gas station when it was about to be robbed, and you were going to be paying for your gas at the register when it happened, and they come up and just
started they
to totally disable the criminal and save the day, and woohoo, yeah. That's the start of your wonderful relationship together, or whatever. The point is, it always feels disingenuous. There's always those little moments, like the touching of the hand, and it's like, oh, we touched hands, and I just felt like electric run. Sure, maybe. I don't know.
Shut up.
Unlikely.
Not you, but yeah. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm just too cynical of a person, but it's like I get that feeling, but I don't really want to read it. It's like, yeah, I feel a certain warmth when I hold hands with a significant other, or whatever it may be, but it seems so exaggerated. It kind of reminds me of like Hallmark Christmas movies, but with a slightly more sexual nature. That's pretty much it. And you're reading it.
Yeah.
Which to me brings out a little bit more of the awkwardness.
Yeah. So I don't know. It just feels like you have to exaggerate it for it to be worth reading, and then you exaggerate it, and it's like,
then it becomes too much. At least in my opinion.
Yes, it's too much. It's overdone. I think romance works really well as a side piece to genres.
Yeah.
Have your story be whatever it is, and then there's romance that goes on in the background. When the entire story is based around romance, it tends to be that you have to exaggerate things, and then you exaggerate them, and it's just like, this is just unrealistic. It doesn't feel... It doesn't feel good for me anyways.
Yeah. And like we said, this is subjective, and we are clearly not the demographic of...
Did we say that? I don't think we said that.
Oh, welcome to Tier List Tuesdays. We are subjective. All right, there we go. Maybe that'll be the cold open instead of whatever the fuck we were doing earlier.
Maybe. Are you there?
Oh no.
Yeah, you're there.
Oh no.
What happened?
Are you, you're back. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Good.
Okay.
Good.
I think something happened with either my internet or your internet.
I think you went through a tunnel.
I didn't see anything happen to my internet, so I
maybe it was me. Maybe I went through a tunnel.
I don't think I'm recording this podcast on a train. Let me double check.
My eyes were closed. I might have been in a tunnel. I don't know.
See, I mean, it could have been dark in there. Yeah.
And I wouldn't even know. All right. Yes. Romance.
One internet disconnection later.
F.
Yeah, romance. F?
D? F.
F? I mean, romance.
F for fantasy is an S tier, so right? someone get down there.
Boom, fomance. F is in fomance. And I'm leaving it because I'm fucking, I don't know, trying to be funny. Let's go to Westerns.
Yeah, okay.
I said that real enthusiastically.
I'm kind of weird about even having Westerns on the list, not gonna lie, because they're basically just historical fiction set in the West.
That's a pretty fair point, actually. You want to just put it in B? I don't know enough about Westerns. I kind of thought you would have like some weird surprise insight, as you do sometimes. And I thought you were just going to be like, well, the best Western author is, and, like, just fucking school me.
I mean, I've read a couple of Western stories, but, like, it's always just, like, the cowboy dream,
Yeah. Good old, like, Sam Elliott type who's just trying to make a living for his family.
Yeah, just rustling some cattle, trying to get them on down to the auction, but then those gosh darned bandits come swooping in, and ain't no choice but to round up a posse and go teach them what for.
In every Western book, you kind of have to read like this. It all started back in 1862. The Abbott family just moved out to Texas. They were ready to start their new lives as cattle ranchers. And then banditos came. They were up to no good.
Yep.
Started making trouble in Abbott family's neighborhood.
Oh no.
Got in one little fight.
Oh no. Oh no.
And said you're moving with your auntie and Uncle Belair.
Wait, hold on.
This is completely unrelated, and I don't even know if I want to keep this in. But I might have told you this. Whenever I was at band practices, whenever we were trying to like write songs, we'd just start playing whatever came to our heads, and we would always at one point just start rapping the beginning to that theme song.
I mean, how can you not?
It's just like real like hardcore punk riffs, and then out of nowhere, in Westville. It's a good time. Anyway, so you wanna just leave Westerns at B with historical fiction? Cool.
Yeah.
You're right, because it feels very strange to not keep them together when they are essentially the same thing with a different theme.
Yep.
And also, I don't think I've read enough Westerns to really say like whether they're really good or really bad. I don't think it would be my thing, just given who I am as a person. But you know, it's cool. Excuse me.
I think they make much better movies than books.
That's a fair point. And we might get into that a little bit later down the line. I gotta stop making promises.
Yeah,
We're gonna do these things, and then if they never happen, then I'm just gonna be mad at myself. I don't care if anyone else gets mad.
There you go.
All right, so we'll read them off. Down at the very bottom, we have Fomance for alliterative purposes in the F category. At C, following the alliteration, we have classic literature and comic books. I don't think that was done on purpose, but it's there. In B, we have historical fiction and westerns. We have horror.
I'm sorry, I think you read that wrong.
What?
It's historical fictions and westerns, as well as
historical
and
fiction,
graphic
westerns, borer, and graphic novels. In the A, in the A tier we have a hort, a tories, and a thrillers. In the S category we have science, fiction, and fantasy. Thanks for listening to our Siction Suk Sonra Searsist.
Holy Lord!
I've gotten pretty good at doing that for some reason.
Yeah, that
just
wasn't
replacing the first letter with everything.
How'd your DS-er do it? Good?
We'll find out when I fucking start editing it in post, and just I have to cry because my S's just sound like whistles.
Yep.
Oh man, that was worth it for the bit, right?
I think so, probably.
Okay.
You let me know after you get done editing it how worth it really was.
I'll text you later, and if you just get a single text from me that says "God damn it," you'll know.
All right,
yeah, that was fun, man.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I was a little worried for how this would go with. A lot of people are very passionate about what kind of books they enjoy. So, I'm glad it went well. I'm sure we've offended at least 7 people with romance in F. I'm pretty sure that's true.
And if you hate us for anything that we've said today, please let us know down in the comments. Hit one of them thumbs.
There's an up one and a down one.
There is an up one and a down one, but I feel like we're going to get a lot of down ones just because we insulted a lot of book people today. Also, if you hate pizza, I don't want to date you still.
Wow. Okay. You're just going to bring that back up. Okay.
I have to, man.
Dig the knife in a little deeper, why don't you?
Just a smidge. Except this time I'm like stepping on the handle of it. And anyway, this has been good.
Yeah. So, thank you everybody so much for joining us on this Tier List Tuesday. We hope you had a good time. Maybe you agreed with us, maybe you didn't. And either way, that's fine. Let us know what you thought down in the comments below. Otherwise, we'll catch you next Tuesday.
And check out our social media. Cool. Feels good, man. It was I feel bad, like the first half of that list, I was feeling pretty exhausted for some reason. Anyway, I'm going to cut the audio right here.
Ah!
And then there was a jump scare.